In the book of Genesis, what do we really see? What's in the first part when you flip open the Bible? What's one of the first things that you actually see? Is the creation, correct? So we see the creation as we start to look in the scriptures, and I talked a little bit about that last week because I talked about how amazing that is. And but just think, you have this God that just spoke and created an entire universe. And if you think if the sun was moved just a little further away, or the moon was a little too close, or something like that, it would affect all the tides, and it would affect everything. You go to Alaska and you think of how cold it is up there. Can you imagine if the sun was just moved just a little bit? You couldn't even live there. So if everything was perfect, and it was designed to be perfect, so there's just the right draw on everything. When you go out at night, there's just a little bit of light, and you can still see to move around, but it's still dark to give you a time of rest and all these things. And if you get to really digging into creation, everything was created for a reason. And when an animal goes extinct, when we humans, the error of our way, go and start to attack one animal, and we wipe it out, and we make it extinct, because usually animals won't get extinct unless we do it, right? What does that cause? It can cause chaos. It can cause chaos in nature, because everything was designed for a purpose. You got bees; they take care of the flowers. They make all the flowers, pollinate the flowers, all these kind of things. There's all these different things that nature does on its own, and one little imbalance in that causes a problem. Just think, a God designed that perfectly, with an absolute perfection that any person could never do if we tried. We're human, and we'll never make that. So as we start to look at this nature that God created, and this God that exists, and it's just so awesome. And and if you look in the lives of people, I've had people call me just this week and say that they have just felt the way that God, and send messages, and say that they just felt the way that God just completely opens the doors if you're following His will. And so we're going to look at a couple different things. We're going to be looking at Psalm 95, so if you want to start to turn there, it's going to take me a little bit to get there, but we'll get there. Psalm 95 is where we're going to be today. And this is an awesome psalm. And when we get to the book of Psalm 95, it's funny we're reading from the psalm today. This passage, we're going to look at 3 different instructions that God gives us. All right. The first 2 are going to call us to a specific action. So the first 2 things we're going to look at call us to do something. All right, and it's going to be awesome. And then after He calls us to do something, He gives us a very specific reason why we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do. And that's great, and you'll be able to see that. The third thing He's going to do is He's going to warn us strongly against the third action. And that's awesome. And then after that, He's going to give us the result of doing that action. So it's going to be really good. And I hope that you guys will really open up your spiritual ears and your minds and just kind of let this do its work. And the Holy Spirit, trust me, He's got something to say, because this is going to be really, really good. At the very end, I'm going to ask you a final question that I think is really going to reach deep, and I hope it does. All right, so let's get started. If you turn to the book of Psalm 95, we're going to look at the first thing He calls us to do. So we'll start in verse 1. And this is just absolutely incredible because of the songs they picked this week. It says, "O come, let who? Us. Not just one, not me, not you. Let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving." Look at that word. How awesome is that? "And make a joyful noise unto Him with psalms." So here the first thing we're called to do is we're called to do what? To come before God with a joyfully loud presence before the Lord. We're called to come before God and to worship God in spirit and in song and in a praise. And it says in Psalms we're supposed to lift up our voice in a loud, outward expression of love for God. The amazing thing is, as I was looking at this, and I don't know if you guys know this, but Psalms was written by several different authors. And I'm sure you probably know that. If not, you can go back and you can look that up and you can see how clearly that is. Now, a lot of them were written by King David, right? So David writes a lot of these psalms. But Psalm 95, it was debated on who wrote this. However, if you look at Hebrews 4:7, and I'm going to turn there. You don't need to turn there because I need you to stay where you're at. But I'm going to turn to Hebrews 4:7. And I'm going to read something. So stay right there and go down, and I'm going to have you look at another verse. So Hebrews 4:7, I'm going to read it. And what I need you to do is to look down at Psalms 95 and verse 7 as I read this. It says, again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, or saying through David, or David's speaking here, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So he's saying, now at one point, David had said this. So if you look there, if you were watching as I was reading Psalms 95:7, that is an exact quote of those scriptures. So it's pretty obvious that David is the one that wrote this. And we can find that is through several different ways, but that's one of the quickest ways. So it's pretty clear that David is the one that's writing here. So King David here, what is he doing? Who is King David talking to right now? He's talking to the Israelites, right? And these were people that were delivered at a time when they needed deliverance. So what David is doing, if you want to think about this, is he's leading the Christians of that time in corporate worship. What David's doing right here is he's calling the Christians of that time into a corporate, loud praise to God. And if you think about this, the reason why I covered the beginning of this is because I want to make a clear picture in your head. Who is God? Who is he to you? Who is God to you? Because if you really put it in perspective, God created everything, and without him, not a single thing will continue or will exist. If he decides that it's over for whatever it is, it's over. And if he decides it will continue only because he said so. So the amazing thing is, God here, if we look at this, we're supposed to go before God in an outward expression of praise through songs. The amazing thing is we see God in everything that exists. We see God. And we talked about that. Remember in Romans just the other day, we talked about how we can even see God just through the universe. All right. So in verse 2, I wanted to recover this because it says, let us, not I or we, but together, let us come into his presence and worship God. Now, I want to cover something else. And this is very important. What do the scriptures tell us about more than one person? This is awesome. And hopefully you guys have this scripture committed to memory. It says, where two or more are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Think about this. Who is here right now? How many are there of us here? Hopefully at least two are here to worship God and are here to truly serve God. And if that's the case, and I know there is, because I know you guys very well, some of you. So the awesome thing is I know you're here for the right reasons, to worship God and to experience God. And guess what? If he could peel back our earthly eyes, he's here in the midst of us. If you didn't hear it in the Psalms today, then you missed it. Because I could tell you he was here. So the awesome thing is God is here and he wants us to experience him and he wants us to know that he is here, right? So the awesome thing is through the Psalms and through everything else we see God. And here's the thing, if we could just peel our eyes back, I want you to get this. He's standing here today. How would you feel if you closed your eyes in worship and we were singing and for a moment the singing stopped and you opened your eyes and Christ was standing right in front of you and you could see him? The amazing thing is, think about this. Scriptures tell us, and if you don't, it's right here in the book. If you don't believe it, it's in the Bible. It says he is here. That's a promise. That's not just a little story or anything. That means God is here with us in this very room because there's two or more gathered in his name. So that means he is truly here. It's just we can't see him. But do you experience him? So here's the thing. If we truly grasp this concept, we should be worshiping with a spirit of thanksgiving. How awesome is that? And David was calling them to that action. He was saying what we need to do is we need to worship God in corporate worship, out loud, just praising and singing to God because of who God really is in our lives. So the first thing we're to do is we're supposed to worship God loud and proud and with a spirit of thanksgiving, with a thankful heart. If you look at it, let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. So that's the first thing we're supposed to do. And I also gave you pretty much the reasons why. But look at verses 4 and 5. So Psalm 95, verses 4 and 5. It says, in his hand, that's singular, are the deep places of the earth. And the strength of the hills is his also. All right, let's stop there for a second because we need to really get this down. The deep places of the earth, the deepest valleys of the earth are in his hand, a single hand. The strength of the mountains, or the peaks of the mountaintops, if you have a different version, it may say that. The peaks of the mountains are in his hand. So in one hand, he can hold the deepest valleys of this world and the highest peaks of the mountains in his hand. The sea is his in verse 5, and he made it. And his hands formed the dry land. Now you want a reason why to worship God in a loud praise? Think about that right there. The world in its highest place and in its lowest place, he holds it in one hand. And in addition to that, he made it. How awesome is that? When we start to think about this and we start to think about why and how we should worship God, that should give us a very, very clear answer. So the first thing he does is the first thing we looked at there is we're supposed to do what? He calls us to an action to worship God in a spirit of thanksgiving. And secondly, it gives us the reason why. Now we're going to look at the next thing he calls us to do, or the second thing we're supposed to do. Look in verse 6. Psalms 95 verse 6 says, "O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are his people. Oh no, we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice." So this is awesome, because now what he's telling us is he's giving us a whole different thing. And I read an extra verse, but that's okay. I meant to read only verse 6. It says, "Oh come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." Think about this. What was the first thing we were called to do? To worship out loud and proud, with a spirit of thanksgiving. To be out there in the face of God, just worshiping before God. The second thing we're called to do is just a little bit different. Now instead of standing and praising loudly, we're to kneel before God in a spirit of humility, but still with a spirit of thanksgiving. This is, the first thing we talked about is, standing up and singing and praising God with psalms and all these kinds of things, right? This is a more quiet type of praise. Think about this. When was the last time you closed the door behind you when you went into your bedroom and just fell on your face before God? If you haven't done that recently, just go do it. Not because of the things you want or the things you need or, all these different things. So many times we as Christians, we get caught up in all the problems, right? We come before God as soon as we have a problem. When was the last time you went before God and just fell on your face and said, "God, you are the creator of everything," in a spirit of thanksgiving, just thanking God for all that he's done? So this is a more intimate time where we kneel in a quiet, reverent, respectful, humble time of praise. It's not a time to give your problems and all these things to God, right? That's what a lot of us do. If you look at specifically what it says, let us worship and bow down and kneel before the Lord our Maker. We're supposed to come before God and give him a time of worship and praise. It's easy to get caught up in the flip side of it. We have we run around, we do everything. We've talked about this many times. If we had everything we ever needed, it would be so hard. And that's why. If you think about this, think of the last time you did that. Think of the last time, not out of problems, not out of the chaos, not in all the confusion, and not in all the finances and all these kinds of things. When was the last time, just because you just fell down before God in praise, not you just giving God your problems? So the amazing thing is we're supposed to come before God also in this time. It represents, you look at the first one, it's a more external type of worship, and it's a more external, corporate type of praise. The second time is a very intimate, very quiet, very personal time of devotion before God. So now, let's look at verse 7. Because verse 7 tells us why we're supposed to do that. And I already read it, but that's okay. It says, "For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture." Does this remind you of something just 2 chapters back? The 93rd Psalm? Or no? That's funny. No, not the 93rd Psalm. What Psalm is that now? It's like losing my head. What is it? 23rd. The 23rd Psalm. So just a couple chapters back, my mind was like completely gone. So the 23rd Psalm, I'm thinking 93, 23rd Psalm. So in the 23rd Psalm, we are the people of his pasture, right? We're supposed to be the people of his pasture. So we're supposed to, like when we look at this, for he is our God. He is our God. We can claim him. He's not your God, or your God, or yours, or yours. He's all of our God. And we are the people of his pasture. Think about what he promises in the 23rd Psalm. So this is why we're supposed to take a quiet form of worship as well. Now continuing on, we are the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice. So now God is going to start to talk to us. And now he's going to give us the warning that I was talking about and the difference. So the third thing he does is he gives us a warning. And if you look at the end of verse 7, and we go all the way to verse 10. So we're going to read quite a few scriptures here all in one time. So verse 7, it says, "For he is our God." Oh no, the end of verse 7. "Today, if you will hear his voice," so this is the part we read before, "harden not your heart as in the day of provocation, and as in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me and proved me and saw my work. 40 years long was I grieved with this generation, and said it is a people that do err in their ways, and they have not known my ways." So here's the thing we need to look at. So he gives us a warning now at this point. And what does he say? Harden not your heart. Now think about this, because this is really important. What does he also say? He says something about 40 years, right? Who did we just talk to? Who did we just say he's talking to? The Israelites, right? The Christians that were Israelites. What happened to them? We got to kind of talk about this to really to kind of understand what's really going on. Okay, so the Israelites had something really amazing happen, right? They're in Egyptian slavery, right? And they had spent a lot of time there. And so they were in slavery for years. Slaving, doing crazy, crazy things that would just be extremely difficult. Whipped in their back and all kinds of stuff. And now Moses and Aaron go to set them free. And what does he do? He sets them free. And what does God do? They need food, right? And they get out there and there's no water. There's no water anywhere. What's the first thing they do? "Oh, you brought us out here to die. We would be better off if we just went back," right? And so then they start complaining, and Moses, goes and prays to God and says, "Lord, they would kill me if you let them. I mean, these people are about to kill me over this stuff." And God says what? "Well, then hold your rod up, and the water will come out of the rock, and he makes water for them. And then they run out of food, and he brings them manna, and all these different things that God does." So God does a lot of stuff for these Israelites. And what do they still do? They still complain constantly. He parts the Red Sea for them. Has he parted the Red Sea for you yet? He parted the Red Sea for them. How awesome is this? Just think of all the things he did for these Israelite people. But guess what they did? They hardened their hearts. Because it says, for 40 years long, in verse 10, "I was grieved with this generation," and said, "It is a people that do error" where? In hearts. The thing is, these people had hardened their hearts. Not necessarily to God. That's a dangerous thing, and we don't want to do that, right? But we need to make sure we don't harden our hearts to anyone. Anger, bitterness, resentment, all these kinds of things we don't have time for. The amazing thing is, I went from being 25 to being 35 and then to 38 just like that. We don't have time to sit there and live our lives in bitterness and anger and all these things. And the amazing thing is, as you start to turn away from these kinds of things, and you start to say, God, give me a different heart, give me a different spirit, what is he going to do? He's going to do it because he promises to. But the first thing he said is, don't harden your hearts. You need to have a heart of compassion, a spirit of thanksgiving. Don't harden your hearts on me, and don't harden your hearts on each other. Come at this with a spirit of thanksgiving. So the first two things he tells us to do are we need to first worship God out loud, because he has created all things, and he's our creator. The second thing, we're supposed to worship God in a spirit of quiet, reverent worship to God on the inside. So we're to worship God on the inside and on the outside. And then the third thing he warns us against is having a hardened heart. And here's the thing. When we start to look at all these things that the Israelites, that happened for the Israelites, and all the blessings that God gave them, there's just something missing. Why do they have to wander for 40 years in the desert? Because of their hardened heart to God. And he said to them, no one from this generation will enter into my peace and quiet. Do you remember? If you don't know the story, go back and look it up. So let's look at verse 11. And when we go to look at verse 11, this is so he gives us a warning, and then what's the last thing he does? That I said, he's going to give us a result if we don't listen. So in verse 11 it says, now we got to think about this. Don't get your head wrapped up in this and just get all mad at God, because that can happen. But in verse 11 it says, unto whom I swear in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. Who was he talking about in verse 10 in the previous scriptures? He was talking about the Israelites, right? We just talked about that. So for 40 years they stayed in the wilderness. What did he do while they were in the wilderness? Did he turn his back on them? Because here's what happens. A lot of times people say, oh, God used the word wrath, and that means he's mad and he's just going to knock them down and tear them apart and all this kind of stuff, right? God said, in my wrath, I swear that they should not enter into my rest. But think about this. What did God do for those Israelites that we were just talking about in the prior scriptures? When he said, 40 years long I was grieved with this generation. It is a people that do err in their heart. What did he do for them? He didn't turn his back on them, did he? No. He still gave them food when they needed it. He still gave them water when they needed it. He still parted the Red Sea. He gave them protection. So what does God promise to do for us? He promises he is our God. And he will give you protection. He will feed you. He will clothe you. He will meet your needs, irregardless. But guess what happened? There was this place called Jericho. You heard about that in the scriptures? It was a place that is referred to as just dripping with milk and honey. It was a place of complete peace. It's what God wants for all of us. He wants all of us to have it. What do we need to get it? He just gave us the answer. The first two things we need to do. The third thing is your warning. So if we start to bow down before God and to worship God in spirit and in truth, in humility, but at the same time worshiping God on the outside and praising God and showing a spirit of thanksgiving to God and to Rebecca and to Scott and to everyone else in here, if we start to greet each other, the world, what's the problem with the church? Sometimes it's so quick to turn its back on the people that don't kind of mix, but they just don't click. And so what do? They turn their back on it. Before church started, Pam was sitting there and a family came in and I could tell they were a little down on things, and I said to Tisha, I went back there and as soon as I saw them, I said, Tisha, put together a bag of donuts and send it with them on their way. Unfortunately, that didn't get done. But the thing is, we need to, when we see people that are hurting, and we know they're hurting, we need to be jumping through hoops to reach them on whatever level we can and to take care of them. That's what God did. And if God sent his only son here to do that, to start worshiping in a spirit of thanksgiving. We need to be carrying that spirit of thanksgiving with us everywhere we go. And when we see people that are hurting, we need to find ways to meet their needs. You know, the amazing thing is, as we were sitting there with the adults, with the seniors the other day, we just had such a ball with them. The fun we had. Because they don't have a lot of things to do. So we carried things up there, and we sat in their events with them, and we really had a great time. And we sat there and played their games with them. They were doing a little inflatable ring toss, and, you know, they had these noodles that were half length of the noodles from the pool. They had balloons, they were whacking them around, and, you know, things that they could do, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun to get in there and to join them and have fun with them. Because why? Because they love that. They want to experience that. When Stephanie goes up there and sees them and hangs out with those older people, they love that. Because they don't get to experience that all the time. We need to find ways to get out into the world because the world gets shut off enough. We need to start going out there and finding ways to meet the needs of these people. God gives us the answer to certain things. And I want you to listen to something else that's in Psalms 51 and verse 10. If you look at Psalms 51 and verse 10, it's a result of something David had done. David had sinned, right? We all know what David did. He wakes up in the morning after a long nap. You know, he stretches, he walks out on his patio. He's like, oh, she's cute. Right? She's off limits. She was married. And he knew that, but he did it. He did this bad thing, right? But he knew what? He knew who God was. And so David in Psalms 51:10, he prays to God. And what he says is, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. What did David do? He knew right away what the source was. He knew how to fix all these problems. You know, David sinned, and it's easy to say, well, God would be mad at him. Yep. But David, we talked about this the other day. God called David a man after his own heart. But he created some bad sins, right? Well, we could say, well, God should have knocked him down if I was God. Oh man, it's quick to be, sometimes Christians are the quickest to be judgmental, right? We need to knock that off. So when David goes and he realizes, he goes before this God that is all-loving, all-consuming, all-powerful. And he realizes that the earth and everything else bows down before God. How awesome is that? So David knew the source and how to fix the problem. He knew exactly who he needed to go to. So he goes before God and he says, God, I'm broken. Have you ever been there? You fall on your face before God and say, God, just put within me a new heart and a new spirit. You want to know something? There's an answer to that. And there's a promise for that. It's found in Ezekiel 36 and verse 26. The amazing thing is this is God speaking. And it says, a new heart also will I give you. And a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh. And I will give you a heart of flesh. Listen to that. If we're fighting over a spirit today, if you've got this, if you're trying to get the spirit of Thanksgiving and it's just a little difficult, and you're trying to get there, and you're like, it's November, it's time to be thankful. And it's so easy to sit there and say, oh, everybody gives something they're thankful for, right? But how hard is it to actually live that? Trust me, there's times in my heart where I can get a little bitter myself, but I know right away what I need to do. And here's the thing, what we all need to be working on, not in November, but all the time. We need to start working on having a heart of thanksgiving and a spirit of thanksgiving. That's what we're called for. That's what these scriptures tell us to do. And what does God promise? Ezekiel 36:26 gives you the answer. If you're struggling with this stuff, I would strongly encourage you to take this if you need to and write it in big letters and post it on your wall. Go get a poster if you need to, a poster board, and post it on the inside of your door. So every time you go to walk outside your door, what do? You see that every day. And you start to pray, God, put a new spirit in me. Give me a new heart of compassion, a heart of love. And guess what God will do? Because, you want to know something? He can't lie. I've run businesses before. I've run several different businesses. What kind of owner would it be if you said, hey, on Friday I'm going to pay you $15 an hour. And then Friday came and you said, I'll give you $9 instead. You're not going to have anybody left very long. They're all going to leave. But you promised me this. Oh yeah, I'm the boss, I'm the owner, and I can do whatever I want to. No. Because there's labor laws and all these kinds of things and all this. You want to know something? God made his promises right here. He gave us the promises. Ezekiel 36 and 26 is easy to remember. 36, 26, very easy to remember. Commit it to memory. He makes a promise to us that he will give you a new spirit and a new heart. So if you're struggling with that, all you got to do is pick this up. It's his promise. Start praying to him like David did when David knew he was wrong. And he will give you a new heart. The question today, like I said before, is not just for the month of November. The question here today is all the time. We should be asking ourselves this all the time. So the question I have for you guys this morning, Jim, if you and Sarah want to come forward. The question I have for you guys this morning is, what's the condition of your heart? Think about it. What is the condition of your heart? Think about what God did. He didn't turn his back on them, correct? Did he turn his back on them and say, you're on your own? You have a hard heart. You're a wicked generation. I'm just going to let everybody just slaughter you. And as a matter of fact, I'll send an earthquake and this and that and all this stuff. No, because we're still God's people, right? So instead, he still met their needs. The question is, do you want God to meet your needs? Are you walking through your own wilderness here on earth with just your needs met? Or are you walking in a Jericho? That's the real question. If you're walking in a wilderness and you just feel like you're wasting, and time is passing by, maybe you just need to enter into God's presence and into everyone else's presence with a spirit of thanksgiving. So would you prefer a wilderness or a Jericho? Let's pray.